Obesity is the most critical health issue to face Eastern North Carolina today. It affects nearly half the patients in our hospital, and it disproportionately affects the poor. Now, we think we know why people become fat. They eat too much, they exercise too little, maybe they don't have access to healthy foods or a gym membership, but at the end of the day, we know one thing's for sure. It is their fault. We say that obesity is a question of personal responsibility, and in saying that, we imply that it's a moral problem. Someone who's obese is a glutton, a sloth, or both. In today's age, it's not okay to openly mock someone for the color of their skin, or their gender, or their sexual orientation. But are they fat? Well, this is something they can change. So it's something we can look down on them for. During my short time in medicine, never have I heard more disgust for a patient than when he or she was obese. I have heard simply awful things said about patients, terrible judgments made preemptively about their character, all because of their size. A paradigm of obesity has been set, that it's the person's fault. And operating under that paradigm, we as healthcare providers are complicit in a system that continues to fatten our society. We perpetuate these myths. We buy into them and we spread them to our patients. And when these patients fail at our misguided advice, the blame goes on them. Imagine if the paradigm were reset. What if something else was to blame? And what if the hard science is there, but we've been overlooking it? Now, obesity is an incredibly complex issue whose origins can't be traced to one root cause. But I do want to introduce to you some of what we now know. So, let's start in a little place in the middle of your brain called the hypothalamus. This is your control center for your hormones and your energy balance. It's the hypothalamus that decides how much energy you need to take in and how much you're going to put out. It decides this based off of signals it gets about your body through hormones. And one of these signals is leptin. It's a hormone that is sent by your fat cells up to your brain to say, "Stop eating, I'm full." We're now realizing that some obese patients have become resistant to leptin. So it's like their brain can't see it. It doesn't get the signal that it's full and it should stop eating. So their brain thinks they're starving. So they're hungry all the time and they're tired and don't want to move much because a starving brain wants to conserve energy. Now you see, when we look at obesity in this light, we realize that gluttony and sloth are the results of a problem rather than the cause. Now another hormone here is insulin. Insulin's released when you eat to help your body store energy. And it's released in really high amounts when you eat sugar and refined carbohydrates. When you have a lot of sugar floating around in your blood, it makes this leptin resistance worse. So it makes you eat more, and it also makes you store more energy as fat. And when you have high insulin over time, your body becomes resistant to it, meaning you have to make even more and more to get the same effect. Over time, your body can't keep up, and you eventually develop diabetes. And another hormone is cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. In short-term stress, cortisol is very helpful and necessary. But long-term chronic stress, and thus chronically high cortisol levels, has devastating effects on the body that can lead to metabolic syndrome and weight gain. That means that chronic stress leads to hormonal dysregulation that contributes to obesity. Now, it gets even more complicated in your brain because we're now realizing that there's an addictive component to a lot of these sugary, highly processed junk foods that so many of us consume. These things manipulate our brain's reward system. Junk food today has been engineered to give us the perfect fix without making us feel full. So these foods cause our hormones and our neurotransmitters to go out of whack. I'm talking specifically about sugary, highly processed foods. We're even finding that sugar is independently bad for us, as it can cause liver damage that lead to metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So all of this science brings me back to why it matters, because we've been giving our patients the wrong information. Now, we all know the old adage, Calories in equals calories out. We've been saying it for decades, teaching people to read the back of labels and do math. It's the second law of thermodynamics, and it seems to explain things so easily, except for one problem. Calories in, calories out explains how we gain weight, but not why we gain weight. Why do we overeat? And the dangerous thing about this principle is that it makes us think that all calories are created equal, that a calorie is a calorie. But this is deceptive and untrue. Let me give you an example. Let's compare 100 calories of vodka with 100 calories of blueberries. That's about a shot of vodka and just over a cup of blueberries. Now, I think we can all intuitively agree that these two substances are different. They have different effects on our bodies. The vodka only causes harm. Its byproducts damage our liver, not to mention the fact that it makes us drunk and impairs our judgment. So vodka isn't just empty calories, it's harmful calories. The blueberries, on the other hand, are full of fiber and antioxidants, things that nourish our system. That means that a calorie of vodka and a calorie of blueberry are different. They have a different effect on our body. They are not equal. And more importantly, all calories are not created equal. Something else we tell patients when we encourage calorie counting is that there are no bad foods, that it's all a matter of quantity. But this is wrong. Some foods simply are not good for us to eat. And until we stand up and say this clearly, many junk foods will sneak in as health foods. Take the 100-calorie snack pack, for example. Not to mention the fact that calorie restriction simply doesn't work for long-term weight loss. People will drop weight in the short term, but they always gain it back in the long term, unless the underlying hormonal needs are addressed. Something else to keep in mind is that when it comes to food in today's age, choice is an illusion. Many people do not have much choice over the food that they eat. Think about when you walk into a convenience store. What options do you have there that aren't full of sugar or trans fat? Or think about the people who live next to the strip of fast food restaurants on Memorial Drive here in Greenville. What healthy options do they have nearby? Or children who eat the federally qualified school lunch, which is basically fast food? Or you? When you go into a grocery store, 80% of the products now have added sugar in them. So where do we go from here? The first step is to stop blaming obesity entirely on the individual, because when we do that, we're just going to end up right back where we started. Every public health issue starts out as a question of personal responsibility. Tobacco is a classic example, so is alcohol. And then that public health issue becomes a crisis. It threatens our existence, and we realize that we must collectively do something about it. That must now happen with obesity. We must come to terms with the food environment we've made for ourselves, and we must make efforts to curb it. Now, many people balk at the idea of regulation, but we already do it with tobacco and alcohol because we know they cause us harm. And as our target shifts from an individual one towards a larger environmental and cultural target, so too must our intervention shift. This means curbing things like the marketing of junk food to children. Large-scale resolutions aren't the only thing that needs to happen, but nothing will change without them. Now, how about what you can do as an individual? I'd say the first thing is to question what you've been taught. We take as dogma so many ideas in medicine, but what we know is constantly changing. It's time to embrace some new ideas when it comes to diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and obesity. You don't have to be an endocrinologist, that's someone who studies hormones and metabolism, to embrace these new ideas. Because obesity is relevant to every field of medicine, and many fields outside of it. Now, I will warn you that in the world of nutrition, it is a war out there. And that's because what we eat is so closely tied to who we are. But it's a battle worth fighting, and it's worth informing yourself. I've only given you the tip of the iceberg of information. and new and interesting research is coming out all of the time. Keep your mind open. Question these norms we've always been taught. The most important thing you can do. The whole reason I was inspired to stand up on the stage before you today. Change how you view your patients. It's been said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We are doing that when we continue to blame our patients for obesity. To boil it all down to personal responsibility is to negate all that we have discovered. Now, it's true that we don't have all the answers to this incredibly complex issue. But that doesn't make it right that our default is to assume that human weakness is to blame. People who are obese are not weak-minded. They're not ignorant, selfish gluttons who seek to burden our healthcare system. They are human beings living in a toxic environment, many of whom are trying to do the right thing by following our misguided advice. I hope that when you leave today, you will look at these patients just a little bit differently. These are people not in need of our disgust or our contempt, but in need of our partnership to change a system that we as a society have created. It's time to question what we believe, what we've been taught, and how we act. It's time to change our paradigm on obesity. Thank you.